My beloved child, something has shifted quietly in the heart of this person, and the most surprising part is not what they want to say to you, it is where they have imagined saying it. There is a location they keep returning to in their mind, a place they did not choose because it was impressive, expensive, or dramatic, but because something about it reminded them of you in a way they could no longer ignore. And if you knew the small detail that made them stop there the first time, you would understand why this surprise has become so personal. Don't skip, because the location itself is only the beginning. What matters is the reason they chose it, and that reason has been growing quietly through moments you may have thought meant nothing. Picture an ordinary day. Nothing announcing itself. No grand sign. No perfect movie scene. This person is simply moving through their routine when something catches their attention: a road, a view through a window, the sound of people talking nearby, perhaps a familiar song drifting from somewhere they cannot immediately see. They slow down. Not because they plan to, but because for one strange second, their mind goes directly to you. They imagine you standing beside them. They imagine turning toward you and watching your expression change as you realize why you have been brought there. And then comes the thought they were not expecting: this is the place. They almost dismiss it. They tell themselves it is just an emotional moment, just imagination, just one of those thoughts that arrives and disappears. Yet it does not disappear. Hours later, the location returns to their mind. The next morning, it is still there. And now something deeper begins happening, not something mystical or impossible, but something very human. They start connecting memories. Things you once said. Things you value. The kind of atmosphere that makes you soften. The little details you notice that other people overlook. This person has been paying closer attention than you realize, and that is where the surprise becomes meaningful. Stay till the end, because the most important thing waiting for you is not simply a destination. It is evidence that they remember. There is a difference between choosing somewhere beautiful and choosing somewhere that understands a person. This person seems to be searching for the second kind. Maybe they remembered the way you once spoke about peaceful places, where conversation does not have to compete with noise. Maybe they remembered something you said about wanting to see a certain kind of view someday. Maybe there was a passing sentence you barely remember saying, something about lights at sunset, an old street, water nearby, a quiet garden, a rooftop where the city feels distant, a small cafe tucked away from everything, or a familiar place carrying a memory that never completely faded. You may have forgotten the sentence. They did not. And that is why their choice may leave you speechless. Not because the location is impossible to imagine, but because when you understand why they picked it, you may suddenly realize how carefully they have been listening. Here is where the story becomes even more interesting. They have already imagined the moment more than once. Not perfectly. Not like a rehearsed performance. In fact, the scene keeps changing because they are uncertain about how you will react. One moment they picture you smiling before you even understand what is happening. Another moment they picture you becoming very quiet, looking around, noticing something familiar, and slowly putting the pieces together. They wonder whether you will recognize the clue immediately. They wonder whether you will ask, "Why here?" And strangely, that question is the one they seem to be waiting for. Because they have an answer. A real one. Something simple enough to say in a few sentences, yet personal enough that they have struggled to say it casually. Something important is waiting for you, and it may be hidden inside that answer. There are feelings people can express anywhere, but there are other feelings that seem to need the right setting because the setting helps reveal what words alone cannot. This person appears to understand that. They do not simply want your attention, they want a moment that feels different from ordinary life, a pause where both of you can finally hear what has been buried beneath distractions, hesitation, timing, and all the things people think about but rarely say clearly. And perhaps you have sensed this distance to the strange feeling that something remains unfinished between you, not necessarily broken, just unfinished. A conversation that almost happened. A truth that reached the edge of someone's lips and disappeared. A moment when you both seemed to know more than either of you admitted. Those unfinished moments may be exactly why this location matters now. Then came another unexpected detail. This person began thinking not just about where they wanted you to stand, but about what you would see first when you arrived. That is how carefully the idea has been forming. They noticed a particular entrance, a certain table, a bench, a pathway, a view, perhaps even the exact place where the light changes during a certain part of the day. They imagined you noticing it before they explained anything. And for a moment, they felt nervous not because anything bad was coming, but because meaningful surprises can make a person feel exposed. When you plan something for someone who matters deeply, you reveal yourself without saying, "Look how much I care." The effort says it for you. The memory says it. The choice says it. And maybe that is what this person is truly preparing to reveal, not simply where they want to take you, but how much thought your presence has quietly occupied. There is another layer, though, and this one changes the feeling of everything. The location may connect to a beginning. Perhaps not the obvious beginning you are imagining. It could connect to the first moment they realized you were different. The first conversation they replayed afterward. The first time your absence felt noticeable. The first time they caught themselves wondering what life would feel like if you were closer. People rarely remember the exact second a connection becomes important. Usually, the realization comes later, when an ordinary place suddenly carries extraordinary meaning. That may be what happened here. They saw this location, and instead of seeing only what was physically in front of them, they saw a possibility. You beside them. A conversation without interruption. A moment they would remember differently because you were there. And once that image appeared, they could not completely let it go. Don't skip this next thought, because it may explain why the surprise has taken time. This person does not want the moment to feel forced. They have considered changing the plan. They have wondered whether the location is too personal, whether you will understand the meaning, whether they should choose somewhere easier and more ordinary. But each time they imagine replacing it, something feels missing. The new place might be convenient, but it would not carry the same message. And the message matters more than convenience. They want you to feel that the choice was made specifically with you in mind. Not for everyone. Not something copied from another story. Yours. That is rare enough to make someone pause. Because sometimes the most unforgettable surprises are not huge, they are precise. They say, "I remembered what you said." They say, "I noticed what makes you peaceful." They say, "I thought about how you would feel here." They say, without needing dramatic promises, you have mattered in my thoughts more than I knew how to explain. Now imagine the moment getting closer. This person checks something again. Perhaps directions. Perhaps opening hours. Perhaps a photograph of the place. Perhaps a saved note on their phone containing one simple reminder. Their finger pauses over the screen. They smile, then become serious. Because suddenly the surprise is no longer only an idea. It feels possible. Real enough to make their heart race just a little. They start imagining the journey there with you. What would they talk about on the way? Would you suspect something? Would they be able to hide the reason for taking you there? And what happens when you finally arrive? Here is the part they keep replaying. They do not want to explain immediately. They want you to have a few seconds to look around. To notice the atmosphere. To notice the one detail that connects everything. Because somewhere in that location is a clue, and when you see it, you may understand why they could not simply tell you this through an ordinary message. Maybe it is connected to something you once dreamed about. Maybe it reflects a promise you made to yourself. Maybe it resembles somewhere you spoke about during a conversation they secretly treasured. Or perhaps the place holds a completely different meaning, one they have never shared with you at all. And if that is true, the surprise is about to become much deeper. Because what if this location is not only about your memories? What if it connects to theirs? What if this person has chosen somewhere tied to a private moment when they made a decision about you quietly, long before you knew anything had changed? There may have been a day when they stood there alone and finally admitted something to themselves. A feeling. A hope. A realization that they wanted another chapter, another conversation, another chance to know what could happen if both of you stopped pretending the connection was ordinary. They may have looked around that place and thought, if the right moment ever comes, I want them to see this. And now, for reasons they are still gathering the courage to explain, they believe that moment may finally be getting closer. Stay till the end of this unfolding story, because there is still one detail they have not settled, and it may become the most emotional part of the surprise. They know where they want you to be. They know what they want you to notice. They even know the first few words they hope to say. But there is something they plan to bring with them, something connected to the location and to a memory involving you. It is small enough to carry unnoticed, yet meaningful enough that when they place it in front of you, the reason behind everything may finally become clear. And right now, this person is asking themselves one quiet question: when you see what they have kept, will you remember the moment it came from too? The smallest object can sometimes carry the biggest memory, and that is exactly why this person has been so careful with what they plan to bring. It is not something chosen to impress you. In fact, someone else could look at it and see almost nothing unusual at all. But you may see something completely different. You may recognize a moment. A conversation. A tiny detail from the past that you assumed disappeared the second it happened. And that possibility has been sitting heavily on this person's mind, because they remember far more than they ever admitted. There was a moment between you that looked ordinary from the outside, yet something about it stayed with them. Maybe you handed them something without thinking. Maybe you mentioned a place you hoped to visit one day. Maybe you laughed about something small, wrote something down, showed them a photograph, pointed toward a view, or said one sentence that seemed too casual to become important. But somehow it did. This person carried that memory forward, even during times when life became busy and the connection between you felt uncertain. And now, as they think about bringing you to this carefully chosen location, that memory has become part of the plan. Don't skip, because the surprise is no longer only about where they want to take you. It is about what they finally want you to understand once you are there. They have imagined arriving before you and looking around one more time, making sure the atmosphere feels right. Not perfect. They are not chasing perfection anymore. They are looking for something honest. Somewhere the two of you can slow down enough for the conversation to become real. Somewhere they will not have to rush through words they have been carrying for far too long. And the strange thing is, every time they picture that moment, they keep changing what they want to say first. At one point, they thought they would simply smile and tell you, "I wanted you to see this place." Then that sentence began to feel too small. Another time, they imagined saying, "There is a reason I brought you here." But even that felt incomplete. Because the real reason has layers, and some of those layers may surprise even you. This place seems connected to something this person has recently realized about your connection. They have begun understanding that some of the moments they once dismissed were actually the moments that mattered most. Not the dramatic ones. Not the obvious ones. The quiet ones. The way you listened when they were distracted. The way you remembered something they had forgotten telling you. The way your presence changed the atmosphere without demanding attention. The strange comfort of knowing you were there. And perhaps they did not understand the value of those things immediately. Sometimes people only recognize the warmth of a moment when they find themselves missing it later. That realization appears to have changed the way this person thinks about you. Something important is waiting for you in the next part of this story, because the location they chose may represent that change. At first, it was simply somewhere they liked. Then it became somewhere they associated with possibility. And then, quietly, it became somewhere they imagined sharing with you. There is something about this place that gives them space to say what ordinary settings never allowed them to say. Maybe it is peaceful enough that silence would not feel awkward. Maybe there is a view that makes everything else seem temporarily distant. Maybe the place carries warmth, familiarity, or a sense of beginning again. Whatever the detail is, this person appears to have chosen it because they want the moment to feel separate from everything that has confused the connection before. They want you to step into that space without carrying every unanswered question at once. They want you to notice where you are, breathe, look around, and slowly understand that none of this happened randomly. And there is one thing they hope you notice without being told. They have prepared for you specifically. Not for an imaginary perfect version of you, but for the person you actually are. They have thought about whether you would feel comfortable there. Whether you would prefer something private instead of crowded. Whether you would enjoy the surroundings or feel overwhelmed. Whether the surprise should be revealed quickly or allowed to unfold slowly. That kind of thought does not happen accidentally. It comes from attention. And somewhere along the way, this person seems to have realized that paying attention to you has become natural to them. They notice things now that they might once have missed. They remember your reactions. They remember the subjects that make you light up. They remember when your voice changes because something genuinely matters to you. And that memory is shaping the surprise. But here is the detail that made them hesitate again. Recently, they returned to the location or looked at it again and noticed something they had never seen before. Something small. Maybe an inscription, an old photograph hanging nearby, a particular view from another angle, a quiet corner, a path leading somewhere unexpected, or a feature that immediately reminded them of something you once said. They stopped. That one detail seemed to confirm what they had already been thinking. If they ever brought you here, they could not treat it like a casual outing. They would have to tell you the truth about why this place had become connected to you in their mind. Stay till the end, because that truth is softer and more personal than you may expect. This person has not chosen the location simply because they want to surprise you. They chose it because they believe you deserve to experience a moment where you do not have to guess what you mean to someone. Think about that for a second. So many connections become complicated because people leave too much unspoken. They assume the other person knows. They hope hints will be enough. They wait for a perfect moment that never arrives. But this person appears to be reaching a point where silence feels heavier than honesty. And that is why the location matters. It gives them a beginning, something they can point to when the words become difficult. I chose this because. And after that sentence, everything may begin to change, not through some impossible promise, but through clarity. Through someone finally explaining what has been happening inside them. They may tell you that there were times they nearly reached out differently. Times they wrote something and erased it. Times they considered telling you how often you crossed their mind and then convinced themselves to wait. Times they wondered whether you felt the same strange unfinished pull they did. None of that means they know exactly where everything will lead. And perhaps that is what makes the moment more meaningful. They are not trying to control the future. They are trying to stop hiding from the present. They want to show you what is real now. That may be why the surprise feels so important to them. It is not a grand declaration designed for an audience. It is a private moment designed for understanding. And there is one image they keep returning to, you standing beside them after they finally explain the reason for the location. They imagine a short silence. They imagine you looking away for a second, perhaps toward the view, perhaps toward the object they brought. They imagine wondering whether they said too much. Then they imagine you looking back at them, and that is the part they cannot predict. Will you smile? Will you become emotional? Will you laugh softly because you remember the same thing? Will you simply say their name in that quiet way people do when words momentarily disappear? They do not know. And surprisingly, they seem willing to accept that. Because the purpose of the surprise is not to force a reaction. It is to give you something they have withheld for too long, context. The reason behind their distance. The reason behind certain moments of hesitation. The reason they remembered things they pretended not to remember. The reason this particular location began appearing in their thoughts whenever they imagined seeing you again. There is another realization hidden beneath all of this, and it may be the rarest one. This person seems to have understood that they do not want to create a memory with you just because it looks beautiful. They want to create one that means something later. A memory that, months or years from now, could still make both of you remember exactly what was said there. That is why they have been thinking about timing. Not dramatic timing. Human timing. A day when neither of you has to rush away. A moment when the noise around you is low enough that honesty has room to breathe. Perhaps they even considered arriving close to sunset, when the atmosphere naturally softens. Perhaps morning feels more meaningful to them, like a fresh beginning. Perhaps the location only becomes special after the lights come on and everything around it changes. Whatever they have chosen, they are thinking in details because the moment matters to them. Don't skip this next part of the realization. The location may also hold something that this person wants to give back to you. Not necessarily a physical possession. Perhaps a feeling. A piece of confidence. A truth you were never given clearly. Maybe there was a time when their uncertainty left you questioning whether certain moments between you were real. Maybe you wondered whether you had imagined the closeness, the chemistry, the quiet understanding. And this person may finally want you to know that they noticed it too. That they remembered. That some of those moments mattered deeply to them, even if they did not know how to respond then. This is where the small object becomes important again. They plan to take it out only after the conversation has already begun. Not immediately. They want you to understand the place first. Then they want to show you what they kept. And when they do, they may tell you the story from their side, the part you never heard. What they thought that day. What they almost said. Why they saved this particular thing. Why they could never quite convince themselves to throw it away, forget it, or treat it as meaningless. And suddenly, a memory you thought belonged only to you may become shared. But there is still something you do not know. The location itself contains one final connection to that object, and this person seems to have discovered it only recently. That discovery is what changed the surprise from a simple idea into something they now feel determined to follow through with. Somewhere in that place, something mirrors the memory they kept. A name. A phrase. A symbol. A view. A coincidence that felt emotionally meaningful enough to make them stop and think of you again. And when they noticed it, one thought became impossible to dismiss. Maybe this is where I finally tell them everything. The question now is not why they chose the location. You are beginning to understand that. The deeper question is what exactly they plan to tell you once you are standing there, and why one sentence they have been rehearsing could completely change the way you understand everything that came before. There is one sentence this person has been carrying for longer than you realize, and every time they imagine finally saying it, the entire meaning of the location seems to deepen. It is not a dramatic confession. It is not something designed to overwhelm you. It is quieter than that, which may be exactly why it could stay with you. They want to tell you that somewhere along the way, you became connected to a future they had stopped imagining. And that realization did not arrive all at once. It came through ordinary moments, through memories that kept returning, through places that suddenly felt incomplete because you were not there to see them too. That is why this surprise has become so personal. The location is not simply somewhere they want to take you. It represents the moment they finally admitted to themselves that they wanted to share more of life with you instead of only wondering what might have happened. Stay till the end, because the detail they have been rehearsing is not about making a promise they cannot guarantee. It is about giving you something more grounded, honesty. They want to stand beside you, look at the place they carefully chose, and explain that they remembered your words even when you thought they had forgotten. They remembered the small dreams you mentioned casually. They remembered what made you feel peaceful. They remembered how your face changed when you spoke about certain places, certain experiences, certain hopes. And at some point, this person realized they did not only want to hear about those things anymore. They wanted to be present for one of them. That is the surprise hidden beneath the surprise. They did not choose the location because it looked impressive in a photograph. They chose it because they imagined you becoming fully yourself there. Relaxed. Curious. Present. Smiling without having to force it. And perhaps there is something deeply meaningful about being known in that way. Someone noticing not only what you say you want, but what seems to bring your spirit back to life. This person may have struggled to express that before. They may have used distance, humor, silence, or ordinary conversation to hide how much they were actually observing. But now the effort behind this plan is revealing what words did not. Something important is waiting for you in the way they intend to explain one particular memory. It happened during a conversation you probably did not mark as significant. You were talking about somewhere you would go if you could disappear from routine for a little while. You described the atmosphere more than the destination. You said you wanted somewhere calm enough to think, beautiful enough to remember, and private enough that a real conversation could happen without feeling watched. At the time, this person may have smiled or changed the subject, you might even have assumed they barely heard you. But they did. Months later, perhaps much later than that, those words returned when they came across this location. And for reasons they could not immediately explain, they heard your voice in their mind describing exactly what stood in front of them. That was the first moment the idea began. Not as a plan. Just a thought, you would love this. Then the thought changed. I wish you were here. Then, eventually, maybe one day I will bring you. That progression matters because it tells you something this person only recently understood themselves. Their feelings did not suddenly appear because of one dramatic event. They grew through repeated recognition. Every time something beautiful, meaningful, funny, peaceful, or unexpectedly moving happened, they increasingly wondered what you would think about it. That is a very particular kind of closeness, the moment another person becomes part of how you experience the world even when they are not physically beside you. And this location seems to be where that realization became impossible for them to ignore. Don't skip, because there is still one choice they made that may surprise you most. They originally planned to keep the entire moment light. They thought they would take you there, let you enjoy it, maybe mention that it reminded them of something you once said, and leave the deeper truth unspoken. It felt safer that way. Easier. But then they imagined going home afterward with the same unfinished conversation still between you. And suddenly the idea felt wrong. What would be the point of choosing somewhere meaningful if they continued hiding the meaning? What would be the point of remembering all those details if they never told you they remembered? So they changed the plan. Now they want to say more. Not everything at once. Not in a way that puts expectations on you. But enough for you to understand that the connection has mattered. Enough to remove some of the uncertainty that may have surrounded the past. Enough for you to know that there were moments when they wanted to move closer and simply did not know how. This is where the object they kept finally enters the story. Imagine the two of you sitting or standing together after the first conversation has softened. The nervousness is fading. You are beginning to understand why you were brought there. Then this person reaches into a pocket, bag, wallet, or small envelope and takes out something familiar. Your attention changes immediately. You know it. Perhaps not in the first second, but then recognition arrives. And with it comes the question, you still have this? That question is exactly what they have imagined hearing. And their answer may be simple. I could never throw it away. Not because the object itself is valuable, but because it belongs to a moment when something between you became real to them. They may tell you they kept it through changes, busy seasons, doubts, and moments when they tried to convince themselves that remembering you so clearly meant nothing. Yet every time they found it again, they paused. And that pause told them more than they wanted to admit. The location connects to that object in a way you could never have guessed. Maybe what you gave them came from a place similar to this one. Maybe something written on it matches words they recently found at the location. Maybe the object carries an image, date, phrase, or symbol that suddenly made the entire plan feel complete. Whatever the connection is, it made this person feel that the moment could finally be explained without forcing anything. They could simply show you. Let the details speak. Let you see the line between then and now. Stay till the end, because the emotional peak of the surprise is not the reveal itself. It is what happens immediately afterward. Once the object is between you, this person plans to tell you something they have never explained clearly. There was a moment when they almost lost the courage to stay connected to you. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring had begun to feel more significant than they expected. They did not know what to do with that. They wondered whether they were reading too much into the connection. They worried about moving too quickly or saying something they could not take back. So they hesitated. And perhaps that hesitation created distance you never understood. Now, standing in the place they deliberately chose, they want to give that distance a name. They want to tell you it was not indifference. It was uncertainty. A person trying to understand feelings they had not planned for. A person noticing that you had become important before they had decided whether they were ready for importance. There is something beautifully human about that kind of admission because it does not pretend the past was perfect. It simply gives it context. And sometimes context is exactly what allows two people to look at the same history differently. You may realize that certain silences were not empty. Certain pauses were not rejection. Certain moments that confused you were confusing for them too. That does not erase anything, but it may soften what once felt impossible to interpret. Then comes the sentence they keep practicing. The one they are afraid will sound too vulnerable if they say it too quickly. They may look toward the view for a moment before turning back to you. Their voice may become quieter. And then they intend to say something close to this. I chose this place because every time I imagined being here, you were already part of the picture. That is the heart of the surprise. Not an extravagant destination. Not a performance. A realization. You had been included in their imagination long before they found the courage to tell you. And perhaps hearing that will make you look around differently. The bench, the pathway, the lights, the trees, the horizon, the quiet corner, whatever surrounds you may suddenly feel less like scenery and more like evidence of thought. They pictured you there. They returned to that image. They made a plan around it. And now they are hoping reality can finally replace imagination. Something important is still waiting for you, though, because there is one final part of the plan this person has not shared with anyone. After the conversation, after the object, after the explanation, they want to ask you one question. It is not a question that demands a promise. It is not designed to pressure you into deciding the future on the spot. It is softer, safer, and somehow more meaningful because of that. They want to ask whether you would like to come back to this place with them someday, not as part of a surprise, not because there is anything left to reveal, but simply because the two of you chose to return. And that question changes the location one final time. It stops being only a place connected to the past. It becomes a possibility for the future. A place that could hold two memories instead of one. Perhaps that is why this person has been so careful. They do not want to hand you a fantasy. They want to offer you a moment. Something real enough to stand inside, simple enough to understand, and meaningful enough that neither of you has to pretend it meant nothing. Yet there is one final detail they have kept completely secret, and it is waiting at the location itself. Something arranged there before you arrive. Something small, personal, and connected directly to a sentence you once said without ever imagining someone would remember it. And when you finally see it, you may understand why this person believed words alone would never have been enough.